Hello and welcome. We are happy to have so many of you joining us today for our session, Transforming Public Libraries' Approach to Digital Literacy and Tools for Success. My name is Catherine Bergerson. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at NewsBank. Today, I'm joined by my colleague behind the scenes, Abby Hogland. You may hear us call out to her during the presentation. And as we get started, I just want to let you know the session is recorded and we will send a copy of the presentation to everyone who registered in a follow-up email. We are so grateful for so many people joining us truly from around the world today. I think most states are represented and we have many people even joining us from outside of the United States. So we know this is just such an incredible topic and we're grateful for you spending part of your day with us. So today, quick agenda, I'll share a brief overview of NewsBank and who we are, but then we really want to jump right into the meat of the program, and I'll turn things over to our panelists who will share how public libraries across Washington State and Texas came together with the National Science Foundation to help stop spread misinformation through innovative approaches to digital literacy instruction. And they will also include ideas that you can consider using with your patrons. We'll have time for questions. So depending on the version of GoToWebinar that you have, you may see some gray bars on your screen that either read chat or questions. Just click there, it should open up, type your questions in, or you may see icons. And again, just click on those, it'll open up. Type your questions in there and we will do our best to get to all of them. If we run short on time, we commit to getting back to you in the near future. So please don't hesitate to enter those questions. And we'll pause throughout the presentation to get to them. To kick things off, just share a brief background on NewsBank. We are a leading news and information provider to public libraries, research institutions, schools, military libraries, and many more for more than 50 years. We aggregate sources from all around the world, bringing you, your patrons, teachers, students, credible, vetted, global news sources, many of which are unique to NewsBank and all are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from any device. So as I mentioned, this is really the perfect time to be talking about this conversation and digital literacy. I have a fun fact to share with you. As we were preparing this presentation, a coworker of mine sent me the word of the year according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary. Any guesses on what the word of the year, what that might be? You could enter it in the chat if you want, kind of think about it for a second. So the word is authentic, and we thought that was so fitting for our conversation today. And in the announcement, Merriam-Webster's wrote, separating fact from fiction is getting harder. As what's real becomes less clear, authenticity is something we're thinking about, writing about, aspiring to, and judging more than ever. And that is why Merriam-Webster's word of the year is authentic. And of course, there are so many definitions and uses, and it seems like we're hearing it everywhere right now on the news and in conversations, and particularly as we talk about our approach to digital literacy. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Cindy Altick Aden to lead our conversation. And she is with the Information School at the University of Washington, serving as the Master of Library and Information Science Program Chair and teaching faculty. We're so grateful to have you here today, Cindy, and panelists. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. I am here with my colleagues, and I'm so excited to tell you about this project and kick this off. And I'm going to be queuing for slide changes, so please change the slide. There we go. We are calling our presentation Transforming Public Libraries' Approach to Digital Literacy, Tools for Success. We all know that there are so many challenges now helping our users and our communities separate fact from fiction, and we know that there can be damaging effects from information that is false and misleading. And so that was the basis of wanting to get this grant and do this work. Next slide, please. This is a big project. It is, as Kathy mentions, a NSF grant. We're so grateful to our sponsors. They call it a convergence grant because they really wanted to see interaction between different sectors, different communities. And Dr. Young, Jason, my colleague, really worked on a proposal with a lot of us to really do just that. And you can see from our partner list here that we have 6 library districts, rural library districts from Washington State, Central Skagit, Pend Oreille, Burlington, Asotin, Whatcom, North Olympic, and then our star of the show, our Texas Library, our representative from our sister state. The University of Texas Austin is one of our partners in this grant. And in order to really reach across the aisle and do different kinds of projects, we have included Seattle Central College and its work with the urban part of Seattle, and then Black Brilliance, the largest Black research institution led by the brilliant Sean Glaze. Dr. Sean Glaze has been one of our partners as well, working with communities in Seattle. Next slide, please. We're going to be focusing on the rural library part of this project today. So as I mentioned, Judy Bergeron, Jenny Cole, Jason Young, and I are the speakers you are going to have today, and both Judy and Jenny lead libraries both in Texas and in Washington. Next slide, please. So let me just give you a graphic. For those of you who are not familiar with Washington State, you can see by the blue dots where our rural libraries are located, and Burlington is just north of Seattle, about an hour. North Olympic is way out there on the peninsula to the west. Whatcom is right up there next to the border. And then Asotin and Pend Oreille are our far eastern libraries. Smithville right down there in the lower, not quite middle part of Texas. And you can see that in terms of service populations, pardon me, Smithville has a slightly larger service population, but I hope you will note that Burlington gets $100 per capita, whereas Smithville gets 25. And therein is part of the challenge and opportunity in rural library work. Okay, over to you, Jason, and thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cindy, and really thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us today, because we really need your partnerships in what's kind of a really hard struggle to make sure that our patrons and our communities have access to the best information that they can have to make their their daily decisions and really kind of create a healthy and information environment for everyone. So I'll go to the next slide. And part of my job here at the beginning is just to make sure we're going to be using some terms like misinformation or disinformation or fake news. And so I want to make sure that probably you're all really familiar with all of these terms and have patrons kind of coming in talking about this stuff all the time. But just want to make sure we're kind of all on the same page as we go through the presentation and start to talk about some of the solutions that we're coming up with. But we have this big project that's a collaboration with all these public libraries. And it's really a reaction to the rise of all of this bad information, so inaccurate, untrustworthy, misleading information that we've seen increasingly circulating out there on social media and through in-person networks within communities. And we see from our vantage point at the Information School kind of like two different trends, a technology trend and a social trend that we think are really fueling some of this, I'll call it misinformation that's out there. And so I have 2 slides with quotes that kind of summarize some of those trends that we're seeing. The first is really this technology trend where we've seen like widespread adoption of all of these cheap tools that allow us to get our opinions out there in the world. So you've seen like internet is more accessible than it's ever been, cheaper than it's ever been. Not that everybody has access, but a lot of people do. And we all have smartphones, or a lot of us have smartphones or laptops or tablets. And there are all these sites out there, social media sites, that let us go out and say whatever we want without any fact checking, without any sort of oversight. And the internet lets us spread those ideas all over the globe. So that's kind of the first trend we're seeing, is that bad information that anybody puts out there can impact a lot of people day in and day out. Next slide. The second one, the second issue that we're seeing that's really fueling misinformation and making it a problem is a social trend. And so I think that this quote does a really good job of exemplifying how people and communities have stopped caring about truth sometimes. So Alexandra talks about how we in many ways are living in this post-truth era where whether it's a lie or truth doesn't matter to many people. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. Instead, what matters is that whatever the alternative facts are, so-called, that they actually resonate and make sense to them. And so I see this all the time, and I even feel it sometimes, right? It's like I see something really quick that I haven't been able to fact check, but it kind of, it goes with what I think the truth is and what I feel like the truth should be. And there's a certain attraction to that, particularly given how busy we all are in our everyday lives, where we're not going to fact check if we think this conforms to how we see things. But it's a problem, right? Like, it's one of the things that leads us not only to spread misinformation, but to start to kind of resist anybody trying to correct that misinformation, because we'd rather go with what feels good rather than what that truth actually is in many circumstances. Next slide. And so these are, the next couple of slides are just some of the impacts, right? So we have technology that lets us spread misinformation. We have a social context in which people are willing, not just willing to believe that misinformation, but want to believe that misinformation because it feels good. And it's impacting every area of life at this point. So these are just a couple of headlines from this past summer where we've seen misinformation about various events related to natural disasters. So Burning Man, for those of you familiar with it, they had flooding, and there were all sorts of false claims that emerged around that, or the tragic fires in Maui this summer, misinformation trying to tie China to that. Next slide. Everybody's impacted. So there are sometimes these narratives of youth really being digital natives and knowing what's going on. That's not true. We're all, even including us on the panel, I think we can say, like, there's a danger to all of us kind of falling prey to misinformation. And so young people as well, like, clamoring for solutions. What do we do about these things? Next slide. Medical misinformation obviously is a big one that's impacting a lot of communities out there. There are also concerns around how it's impacting journalism, especially local journalism, and misinformation about science as well. And then final of these slides. Another kind of big intersection with all of this misinformation is increasing fears around artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is this new technology that's rapidly emerging, and it's able to do things like create deep fakes or kind of automatically create false information. And so folks are really grappling with how might this make things worse. And there's a lot of discussion around how it's both a global problem and a problem that can really have a political impact in terms of the way that people make decisions around voting and other types of political decisions. Next slide. So, huge problem impacting a lot of different parts of our lives. One of the natural things that many of us that have been around the library scene for a while or academic scene, we turn to education as a solution, right? Like, how do we educate people so that they have the appropriate tools to make sure that they're engaging the information that's true and that they can trust and that will empower them in their daily lives. But one of the problems that we've encountered is that a lot of the kind of traditional approaches to digital literacy may not be up to the task to appropriately address like this really new phenomenon that is misinformation spread through technology. And so Dana Boyd is a researcher at Microsoft Research, has done a lot of incredible things around digital literacy and misinformation and beyond that. But she kind of registers this concern that right, we have this idea that media literacy is this empowering thing that's really enabling individuals to have agency, gives them tools to help create a democratic society. But she's concerned that actually one of the things that these digital literacy skills do is they actually make people go out on the internet and try to pick apart things and actually instill doubt. Which is actually one of the things that misinformation is trying to do, is to make people doubtful of the social reality around them. And so she registered this concern that, hey, we're actually kind of fueling some of the same doubts that misinformation is trying to get people to feel. And so this was a little bit of inspiration for our project, but we also had inspiration from a lot of libraries that we've worked with over time and a lot of communities that we collaborate with, that there are actually a lot of other reasons why digital literacy isn't working the way we've traditionally thought about it. Some of that is like, it's too boring. Like people don't wanna, they don't see how digital literacy affects them, impacts them in their daily lives. And so they're not gonna come into an hour-long program in the library and learn about digital literacy. Some of it is the political nature, right? We've become very partisan, very polarized. And so anything having to do with misinformation, particularly in some of our rural communities, that's gonna be met with a lot of distrust, or even patrons kind of coming in and trying to disrupt some of the programming that may be trying to address this phenomenon. And so we saw a lot of and sometimes it's also just, you know, a really basic thing, like some of our traditional media literacy doesn't have enough technology literacy or digital literacy built into it. And so the ways that misinformation work aren't quite covered. So next slide. So on the one side, we think traditional digital literacy not quite working, particularly for a lot of these political and emotional reasons. On the flip side, misinformation is actually really, really good at exploiting those same things, like emotion, identity. Misinformation is really good at making us feel things, because again, right, it's all about kind of painting this picture of what we want to believe. And so misinformation can do a really good job of kind of undermining the exact digital literacy approaches that we want to use to address it. And so, as I mentioned before, some of our library partners have seen where, you know, when they advertise different information or digital literacy approaches, that patrons may not show up to the training because they don't see why it's relevant to them, or they don't think they're going to be tricked, right? Like maybe their neighbor needs this training, but they're not the ones that need to show up to this, or perhaps worse, they'll kind of see patrons that show up and are quite combative in some of these trainings or programming. And then finally, it's unclear, you know, whether patrons actually use some of the skill, like even if they show up, even if they're great in the training, some of these trainings end up really focusing on pretty benign topics, right? That people, you know, because we're trying to avoid that like political, those difficult conversations. And so it's unclear whether the skills that they learn transfer when they go back out into their community and start to engage with topics that might be a little bit more politically sensitive and a little bit closer to their own hearts. So for all of these reasons, our project believes that like we need to reimagine digital literacy a little bit. We need to reimagine how libraries approach trying to address this problem of misinformation, and not just libraries, like more broadly how communities try to address information and digital literacy. But we think libraries are the perfect place to start because of their role as community organizations and this traditional role of really helping communities like find trustworthy sources, find good information. And so that's why I'm going to turn it over now. I think, Judy, if it's okay, I'm going to have you talk about the day in the life of a library slide next, just to kind of illustrate like why libraries are the perfect starting point to start to rethink how we approach digital literacy.
Thank you, Jason. And coming up with the idea of a day in the life at a library is there's really no, one day isn't going to look the same as every other day. So it's hard to describe that day in the life, but it can be anything from somebody coming in with questions about inaccurate information or needing help navigating something that they heard, or digital access, digital literacy. And so the Co-Designing for Trust, we're hoping that we can come together and help create a toolkit that will allow us to teach some of these skills to our patrons. And if they spread throughout the community, that would be even better. But maybe even also bringing folks into the library so that they can see what we have and see what we can offer to teach them. So the next slide, please, I'll tell you a little bit about our community and why the Smithville Public Library decided to get involved in this project. We are, as you saw in an earlier slide, our service population is 13,000, but our actual town population is only 4,000, and we serve a lot of rural areas. We are located about 45 miles southeast of Austin, but we still like to call it deep in the heart of Texas. And we are in a triangle between, we call it the heart of the megapolis, but it is between San Antonio, Houston, and Austin. If you made a triangle with that, we'd be right in the middle of it. And that was the railroad routes back in the day in the early 1800s. There were early 1900s. There were the Katy and the Union Pacific ran through Smithville. So that had a big influence on the development of Smithville as a railroad town. We were also on the Chitlin Circuit, and the Negro Baseball League played here in Smithville. We were one of the last stops in Smithville. The railroad tracks actually still divide the town between people of color, and they weren't recognized. So that was kind of something that we're trying to overcome still in our city, in our town. But we are also an active movie industry. The house that you see on with the columns is from Hope Floats, if you've seen that movie. And then there's also Brad Pitt in the picture above. He was here for the Tree of Life. We are located in the Lost Pines district, and very much we have a lot of nature around us. But that was the Lost Pines district we almost lost as part of the Bastrop Complex fires about 10 years ago, and just having to rebuild all of that area and having to bring the community together to be able to do that has been part of our programming, but also part of a challenge for the development of our area. If you go to the next slide, please. I'll share with you a little bit about how misinformation has affected our community. We definitely see the digital divide. As I told you, our city population is 4,000, and we have adequate digital access, fiber access here in town. But if you go out beyond city limits, then we're going to see a lot of people that do not have access. And so how can we serve them? How can we bring them into the city? We do have a lot of marginalized groups, small marginalized groups, as I mentioned, the railroad tracks that divide the city. We were at one library program, and we asked the question, if you could be anything you want, what would you be? And one woman said, I would be a bulldozer, and I would lift up those tracks and move them so that we could join the community again. And so that was very moving for us to be able to see that divide and how it's affecting people in their lives. And another one that we're dealing with now is with the older residents and the newcomers, the transplants. And that's where we see a lot of social media effect when people are getting on Nextdoor. How do we want our city to grow? How do we want to deal with economic development? And there's definitely a divide in the ideas that some of these groups have. And it can be emotionally tense, and these are our neighbors. So how can we work with each other? How can we help people to see through some of those comments and look for ways to communicate and build community. That's one of the things we're working on. Now I'll send it to Jenny to talk about Burlington Public Library.
Yeah, great, thank you. So next slide, please. So Burlington is located, as Cindy said, about an hour north of Seattle, and we sit at the intersection of Interstate 5 and a scenic state highway. And so while we are a smaller city, we are actually a commerce hub for our county due to the location there. And our city is just 4 square miles, but our resting population starts at 9,000 and then actually grows up to 60,000 in the daytime due to people passing through the area and visiting those businesses. So it's quite variable. Our community also has deep agricultural roots. And like Judy was just saying, there are also tensions here around the newcomers and the longtime residents. And then my library is a little different in being a municipal library. And so we have reciprocal arrangements with other libraries in our county, but we are not part of a system, which makes us kind of sometimes lacking on resources for staff. And we are a department of the city, so it's a little bit different for us. How we came to this project was kind of just feeling defeatist a little bit, being a small library and thinking about seeing these divisions in the community and thinking about how our staff that are always wearing too many hats could make a real impact. And so we tried some different strategies before. We have done displays and other courses to encourage people to look into their information sources more critically. But we realized we weren't always providing pathways for deeper learning and exploration and ways for people to take that out into their daily lives. And so I joined this project to really work with others and learn from them and learn from the experts at UW how we could work together with our small and dedicated team. So next slide, please. And how misinformation has showed up at Burlington is through our community rooms. And maybe some of you can relate to this experience. So we have a local community group, and they're not the one in this picture that is having a great time decorating with flowers, but they're a different group that they use our space and they essentially spread misinformation through their meetings. They claim that their personal freedoms are under attack by the federal and local government. And they also promote pseudoscientific and opinion-based news sources and claim that on their website, this is the news you can trust. In particular, some of their language discusses the need to protect and preserve our county, and again, highlighting those divisions between folks that have lived here for a long time and the newer folks that are moving in. So they are doing this in our meeting spaces. And then, as you recall, my library is a city department. So this group is actually using our facility and spreading misinformation about the system that we're part of, our local government. So of course, I've been concerned about this real-time spread of misinformation. I'm also concerned about the optics and if it could be construed that these folks and their message is part of our message. So I've been thinking about ways to build trust with our community and to reinforce that libraries are credible information sources and our staff can be credible guides, and to get the community connecting with information through us in a more positive way. So next slide, please. So now we just have a moment. If you want to reflect, you can post in the chat how misinformation has been impacting your library and your community, and then thinking through what are some of the ways that you've tried to address it.
I think I'll take over. Awesome. Yeah, so this is kind of the inflection point, I guess, of the presentation. We're starting to move from kind of like, what's the problem? You know, we're all grappling with all these problems to what's the solution that, or the multiple solutions really that our project is trying to come up with. And so we're inviting you to kind of reflect on these questions right now, so that as we move into these solutions, hopefully you can start thinking about, hey, would some of these solutions make sense in my community? Would some of them help me address the ways in which misinformation is impacting some of our patrons? So next slide. What we realized is a couple things based on kind of the nature of misinformation and the ways in which we think that information and digital literacy need to be updated to better address emotion, to better address social context, is that we kind of came up with these criteria for what we think a reimagined digital literacy needs to be. So first, we think that it needs to do a better job of really addressing misinformation holistically. It can't just be a critical thinking exercise or critical thinking information checking, fact checking sort of skill. That stuff is important, but we also need programs that help patrons have difficult conversations with one another in a productive way. We need programs that help patrons reflect on their emotions and the ways in which misinformation might exploit those emotions. So we need to hit the head and the heart and our social relationships in the way that we approach digital literacy. We need resources and programs that are locally contextualized. So we keep hearing again and again, like, these programs aren't working because our patrons aren't showing up. Like, they don't see why this is good for them. And so we need to figure out ways to frame digital literacy so that our patrons and community members can say, hey, oh yeah, like, I do need to show up to that. Like, that's interesting, that's engaging, that's important for me in our lives. And so what our project has tried to do is to really partner with communities so that we can really understand, like, how do we design resources in these holistic ways that are also very relevant and resonant with the patrons that our library partners serve. And so we've adopted what's called a co-design approach that's basically working hand in hand with our librarians to create new programs and solutions and tools with them. Next slide. And so as was kind of hinted at before, we're doing this with a lot of different partners. And so those partners, through these co-design workshops that we have, they've pitched a lot of different ideas because we think we need a lot of different solutions. Like, misinformation works in a lot of different ways. We need to tackle it in a lot of different ways. So in addition to our library partners, we've been working with K-12 schools, mostly high school teachers in rural areas, doing things like creating curriculum for their classrooms, implementing community events led by the youth, where youth are actually going out to senior citizen homes and other types of locations and teaching those folks the skills that they're learning in the classroom to engage with the internet better. We're working with community organizations to do fun stuff. We're creating board games and video games to kind of engage people in a more fun dimension. And then we're also working with urban community colleges to create teaching toolkits that let them implement curriculum with their students. But the star of the show today is really the work that we're doing in these rural libraries. And so we've been doing a couple different things. And like this year, for example, we just implemented a new program with Jenny and are working on kind of developing some new curriculum with our other partners as well. Sorry, new programming with with all the libraries. But in year one of the project, before we even got to programming, everybody said, you know, slow down, Jason, slow down a little bit. Like, nobody's going to come to the program right now. Like, before we get there, we need to do some community engagement around digital literacy. And so what we came up with was this idea of an online and in-person quiz that was mostly fun and got people just kind of interested in the topic of digital literacy, but also slipped in a little bit of knowledge along the way. And so we designed these quizzes to be really contextualized to the rural communities that we're working with, where, you know, we're not hitting them over the head with some sort of political topic or some, you know, misinformation, digital literacy. We're focused on things that people really care about in the communities. And so I'm going to hand it back over to Jenny to show you the virtual version of some of the quizzes that we've worked on over the past year. I think you're muted, Jenny.
Thank you. Okay, I think I've worked it out. So you can see 3 examples here of online quizzes. And what we wanted to do was first make something that was adaptable and scalable for libraries nationwide. So we wanted this resource to be easy to redeploy and for libraries to be able to swap out the logos and fit the language to their local demographics and context. And then what Jason was also explaining was that we wanted it to be kind of unexpected and playful, and to stay away at the start from highly political or other divisive issues. So our first quizzes are mostly about consumer safety. We also wanted to empower patrons, and we wanted to develop an experience that would introduce skills that would help them navigate online spaces, and then rather than breed more cynicism or feelings of helplessness. So that's why we wanted to keep it fun and short. So the interactive quizzes are just a way to gamify the process of thinking critically about a product or claim that someone might encounter online. Each quiz hooks the viewer with a challenge question. And so the three here are, one is about beauty tips. And this was a great video that Jason made that would ask folks to think about if a miracle cream that they might see online is actually a miracle, or maybe not so much. And then we have two that are about buying items from Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist. And so all of these would eventually be placed onto social media platforms or made accessible through other places where our patrons might be online. So that could be through Google Ads, Roku, or Apple TV. So we have a lot of other ways we're experimenting. So can we go to the next slide, please? And you'll see the first quiz is about buying a truck on Craigslist. So this is the slide that the quiz taker would encounter. And it starts off by saying, don't get tricked. Can you figure out whether this truck is a good deal or fake information? And then they are walked through 5 questions, and there are different examples of ways they could respond. And we worked hard to make this language as accessible as possible and to avoid jargon, so it'd be more fun and easier for people to get through. And so the first slide that they encounter says, the first thing you notice in the ad, so it has this language, act now, I need to move this car quickly and have reduced the price dramatically. Then it asks the quiz taker, what is the first and most important thing you can do after reading this? There are a few ways they can answer. And in this case, the correct answer is pause and ask yourself, how do I know this is legit? And so then another explanation pops up in the quiz, and it explains why that was the right choice. So it says messages like this are made to push your buttons so that you don't stop to think about whether all the information checks out. So next slide, please. In our next question on the quiz, we invite the quiz taker to think about how they might verify that this truck is a good deal. And so there are some different ways they could choose to do that. They could private message the seller for more information, browse Craigslist to see other trucks, just send the money because this is awesome. Or what we hope they select, or will eventually select, is the answer to open a new tab and search for this truck. And so once they get that correct answer, it explains why that would be a good thing to do. And there's a little fun trick in here. If they were to Google this truck, they would find out that the Dodge company didn't make this truck in 2008. So next slide, please. And then the next couple pieces of the quiz involve looking at photos in the ads. And so this first photo is the truck. And we ask the quiz taker how they might decide whether or not they could trust this ad by examining this picture and how they might go about it. The correct answer is to do a Google image reverse search. And so if they were to do that, they would find that this was a generic photo of a truck pulled from anywhere online. So it's probably not the actual truck. And then next slide, please. We're still looking at the photos in the ad, and now we're asking the quiz taker to look at the seller's profile picture. And we're asking them, is there anything off about this photo? And so we're inviting them to look more deeply, and what they will hopefully see is that the people around this person are a little bit distorted. And so if they were to select that answer, then they would get the explanation that this is a telltale sign of a manipulated image, often called a deep fake. And we provide a little more information about how looking at the photos is a good way to use your detective skills. And then now to the next slide, please. And our last question in the quiz is whether this person should move on this ad, whether they think after all of that it's a good deal. And so we hope they say, no, this sounds like a scam. And then we go on to explain that this truck posts, this truck ad uses language to push your buttons, of course references trucks that don't exist and uses photos to trick you. And so these are all signs that something fishy is going on. Next slide, please. And then finally, after you take the quiz, we hope that you will land on your local library's page. And so this is an example of one of our partners, the Whatcom County Library System, has designed a landing page that would be the place that folks are directed to after the quiz. So they'll be surprised and hopefully delighted that their library provided them with this fun quiz. And then there are going to be additional resources and access to the other quizzes all in one place. And we are really excited to keep building on this resource. Now I'm going to pass this to Judy to talk about how we are adapting the quizzes to be used in libraries.
Thank you, Jenny. If you go to the next slide, please. As a complement to the online quiz, some of us worked on an in-library analog format of this quiz. It could be in the form of a flip chart, or we could put it on a tablet, but it gives the opportunity, the library workers, the opportunity to have a conversation with our patrons as they're coming in. If they want to take the quiz, we can reinforce our credibility as information guides and help them. We can also invite them to sign up for our digital literacy classes that are coming up, which include a section on cybersecurity and things like that. So making that one-on-one, that in-person connection with our patrons is very important, and we can do it through this online, or sorry, the in-library activity. We can also get to know their experiences. Were they scammed? Have they had an incident where they were subjected to misinformation and disinformation? How did it affect their lives, and how can we share that with them? Well, one of the things that we can do is have something. I made this in quick and dirty, but I used some of the online quiz activities. So if you can see this, but it's just a flip chart. It's on our table when people come in. That's one of the first things that they see. But the cover of it, can you protect yourself from scam? It kind of keeps things light. It's non-threatening examples so that we can start that initial conversation and not make them go on the defensive right away. And it also gives us an opportunity for partnerships. As we're having those conversations, are there other organizations or other businesses in town that will help for monetary money scams, things like that? We'll partner with the local bank and see if they would be willing to help promote this program, but also to help bring in their expertise. If you go to the next slide, please. Another advantage of having this in-library analog, but also to have the online quiz, is that we can use it to do staff training. We can train a variety of members in information literacy strategies so that they can then pass that knowledge on or practice those conversations with patrons as they walk in to do the online quiz. And again, I have to emphasize how important it is to maintain a positive tone, to try and remain apolitical about it, but also to just let everybody know that it's happened to a lot of us, and not everything is fake. It's possible to learn how to vet the information, and so we can shift the focus to those information strategies. So I'll invite everybody to try the in-library activity as well as the online quizzes. And now I am going to pass it to, I believe Jason is summing this up. Oh, Cindy. Okay, thank you.
Cindy, this is Catherine. I'm going to work to try to unmute you. One moment, please. Abby, in the background, if you see how to unmute Cindy, give it a go.
Thank you. Next slide, please, Abby. So this, you all have just heard about our first year's worth of work, and I wanted to just give you an overview of some of the big things we learned. You have seen we did something online, we did something in person, and the online strategy really was about what about those people that don't even come to the library? How do we do something engaging and fun that could reach the entire community, not just those coming in? And then for those libraries who wanted an in-library, it was so that we could engage and really start working with folks one-on-one. So we think both strategies have their place and can be used. It's really important to consider the people who aren't coming in the library, the people who are maybe less willing to sit down and learn something. You can imagine an elderly person, a retired person might be interested in scams. The youth think they've got it figured out. So how do you reach everyone? Gamification has long been shown to be a really great and engaging way to bring people together and to engage people. And we're always looking for ways to dance around the polarizing topics and just engage people in thinking about the things they think they know and the things they're worried about. So the quiz approach has been a lot of fun, and we're working now on more topics, and we invite your ideas of more topics. We've talked about financial information is one area we can go into, but we think the quiz approach is going to be successful. New tools are being planned. We had a wonderful in-person program with teens at Jenny's Library 2 weeks ago. Wow, is there a lot there? And we know that if we are fortunate enough to do things like invite students to make their own TikTok videos about things that they know have been misleading. Gosh, we heard some great ideas. Jenny, what was it? It was Miss Vegan. There's some vegan person out there that the kids had a very strong reaction to. So it was fun to see that they recognize how the emotional component of misinformation is so powerful. So in a nutshell, that's what we've learned so far. That's what we're working on. The last slide, please, Abby. I want you to have a chance to follow us. We are really trying to build resources that can be used by everyone. We're very excited about the opportunity to share what we know and to build a community of all of us using our best ideas. You'll see there is an email there, codesigningfortrust@gmail.com. Write us, get on our mailing list, become one of our colleagues. And thank you very, very much from all of us. It was such a pleasure to be able to share what we're learning, and we're so grateful for your time this morning.
Oh, wow. Cindy, Jason, Jenny, Judy, thank you. What an incredible presentation. I am the mom of a middle schooler, and so TikTok misinformation is just a huge topic, not only in my professional, but my personal life. And so I really learned so much today, and am grateful for all of the information you shared. I'm sure many others are too. We do have a lot of questions. We scheduled approximately an hour. Let's get to as many questions as we can. I encourage you to stay on, and we're happy to answer your questions. When we get to 2 o'clock, we will do our best to wrap things up and answer questions in a follow-up session. But wow, thank you again. Okay, so let's start out with, are there any professional titles, books, articles that you would recommend for continued learning on this topic?
Gosh, if you could pull that slide back up about 4 back, you'll see some of our favorite books on the topic, some written by our colleagues. Right there. That's a starting point right there.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. And you know, some of these are questions we might have covered, but it's always good to elaborate and make sure that we're really answering our registrants' questions. So thank you for that. Resources, either print or online, that are geared for patrons that have lower digital literacy skills. And I'm going to tie this into another question that we have. So perhaps low digital literacy skills and grandparents who are raising children who just are really perhaps disconnected from the social media and digital world that kids are experiencing.
Yeah, I'll say really quickly. So we've been working with Whatcom County to put together this resource page, and so we've been curating that. And I imagine, Catherine, we can share the URL of that as it goes live, so that you can share it more broadly. Because this is just a kind of a screenshot of part of that page. It has additional kind of curated resources that I think could be useful for folks. We haven't yet, to my knowledge, curated a list that is specific to the two groups that you just mentioned. But we actually have a new part of the project that's just starting up right now, where there's so many resources out there already. But what we've realized is, like, one, there's too many. And two, like, a lot of them aren't necessarily developed specifically for libraries. Like, some are, but not all of them are. So we actually have a team of students right now that are working on an inventory of digital and information and civic literacy resources that are out there, and basically trying to annotate each one of them with some information around, like, if I were a public librarian, what would I need to know about how to tailor this? Like, would it be easy to pull this into a program or into my library, or pretty difficult? And so one of the things that really appreciate the question is we're trying to create, like, different categories of resources. And so we can curate kind of one of these lists around, like, folks with low kind of broadly digital literacy skills. Your second, the question around, like, grandparents that are kind of grappling with some of this stuff. It's hard. I think it's hard. I mean, I'm 37 and I feel technologically behind these days. One of the things I want to showcase is with the work that we're doing with our high school teachers. They're actually running a program right now where they're developing curriculum and teaching their students a lot of these digital literacy skills. And then, as I mentioned before, we're going to run this program actually at the local senior citizen kind of hangout spot, where the students are the ones teach. We're calling it a skill swap. So we don't want to go in there and be like, the elderly, the senior citizens don't know anything. We want it to be a skill swap. So the students are coming in and teaching all this technology stuff. But then the folks at the center, then for the second half of the day, they're reciprocating and teaching life skills to the students. And so it can be, something as simple as, like, how do I fry an egg, or other vital things in life. And so we're kind of thinking about, like, how do we leverage those intergenerational spaces to really build relationships that are going to be sustained and allow for that, like, two-way exchange of knowledge.
What of an amazing idea. Thank you for sharing that. I already, like, want to try to implement something like that. Locally, I'm in Naples, Florida. Oh my gosh, I love the idea of the swap. That's great. Okay, so other questions. Let's see. Here's a great question. So today's topic was geared kind of toward public libraries. Are there any tips applicable to state government or military libraries, if anyone could speak to that?
I know that the work that's being done at Seattle Central College has broad implications, because I think in those spaces, it can be similar, but as well, I think there are opportunities to do more curriculum-based things. And we are seeing some great examples of that coming out of Seattle Central College. I don't have their set of curriculum and their workshops in front of me, but we might be able to share some things about that based on what they've been doing. Jason, I'm looking to you to think, can we? Yeah. I just saw Althea, and I know they're working on stuff like that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we definitely have other types of librarians that have been involved. So both at that community college level as well as the high school level, we have some librarians involved there. To this question around government, we actually also currently have a partnership with the Washington State Office for the Superintendent of Public Instruction. So kind of the head educational folks. And so right now we're actually exploring, for example, one of the things that they think a lot about is like there's all this misinformation that kind of targets our schools or targets students in different ways. And they have folks that like the different districts around the state have communications teams, but are often not really equipped well to think about this new paradigm of misinformation. And so we're exploring a new partnership to kind of do the same sort of co-design workshops that we've been doing with the libraries, but with like, for example, these communications teams to think about like, what would a toolkit look like for government or for like a comms team that wanted to like do response to misinformation that pops up into their community. And so we're thinking a lot about like film and video, community-based film and things like that. So I do think like absolutely, like government needs to be, grappling with this. Military, this is a, can be a security issue as well, particularly in the context of like international propaganda. And so knowing how to support effective solutions, I think is just super important for our government and our military. So I appreciate the question.
Well, and I have to say, I know where the question's coming from because a lot of my colleagues from the Washington State Library are on this call. Hello, you all. And I would say that collaborating with OSPI would be an interesting opportunity because it's very delicate in some government settings. For example, the state library reports into an elected official who is a veteran, but there are all kinds of ways that you have to be careful about how you present that information. It goes through a lot of vetting, but it's a cool opportunity for a co-design where you sit down with the librarians themselves and try and figure out what could work. So we're open for new things.
Thank you, Cindy and Jason, for saying that. And I'm going to encourage people who are asking questions. There's a very brief survey as we exit, and there's an opportunity. Please, if you have more specific questions or you want to get in touch with us individually, share your information with us, and we're happy to continue that conversation. I think we have time for one more quick question. Okay, so this is specific to the quizzes. Are there quizzes? So I'm going to do my best to combine the questions about quizzes. So if a patron chooses the call the seller immediately, or the larger question being, if it isn't perhaps the correct answer, how is that handled or addressed? Is there a follow-up to that?
Yeah, I can go real quick. Yeah, absolutely. Like that's where the learning happens, right? So if they choose the incorrect answer, one, we kind of recognize there's a lot of gray area to some of these questions. So it may be like, oh, that's partially right, but here's another way to think about that. Some of the answers are just, so like calling them immediately is probably a pretty bad idea because you're going to get scammed. So we correct, and then we provide kind of that education behind like here's what actually we think you should do, and here's what like here's the rationale behind that. So yeah, those in between slides are really where the like little bit of teaching happens. Yeah.
Wow, thank you. We have a few other questions, but just in the interest of time, I am going to say thank you again to this esteemed panel. Wow, did we have so much interest today. We're so grateful for people truly around the world who took the time to come together with us, and I'm so grateful to the panelists for the partnership with NewsBank.
Thank you. We're so grateful for your partnership. This was fun. Bye-bye, everyone.
All right, I have a few next steps. So if you would like to know more about what we talked about today, if you have questions for the panelists, if you have questions about NewsBank, or perhaps you are new to NewsBank and would like to know more about our flagship resources, Access World News and America's News, we are hosting some upcoming information sessions, and during those we'll share an overview of our collections, how to pinpoint relevant information, and have some ready to use strategies to help engage patrons in your community with digital resources. So please join us, or if you feel like you have colleagues that would benefit, new staff members that might need a refresher, share the invitation or link. And if you register but you can't attend, we will send you a recording to that session as well. Again, we hope you found today's presentation valuable and that you have some actionable ways to enhance digital literacy for your patrons and communities. Again, as you log out today, brief survey, please let us know what you thought about today's session and how we can improve in the future. On behalf of the NewsBank team, thank you for sharing part of your day with us. Goodbye.